The wind howled across the barren expanse of New Mexico territory, carrying with it the taste of dust and dried sage. In the distance, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains stood like ancient sentinels against the pale morning sky. This was 1887, and the land was as unforgiving as the memories that haunted the men who tried to tame it. Eli Garrett stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge. His calloused hands gripped a cup of bitter coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At 35, he looked older. The war had etched lines into his face that peace couldn't smooth away. His dark hair, touched with premature gray at the temples, fell untrimmed over his collar. He'd stopped caring about such things when Martha died 2 winters past. The ranch sprawled before him, 500 acres of stubborn grass and red dirt that he'd bought with his soldier's pension and what remained of Martha's dowry. It wasn't much, but it was enough to run 50 head of cattle and keep a man busy enough to forget, at least during daylight hours. The nights were different. The nights brought memories of Georgia mud and cannon smoke, of Martha's fevered last breaths, of all the things a man couldn't outrun no matter how far west he rode. Inside the house, silence reigned. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the grimy windows. Dishes from 3 days past sat unwashed in the kitchen basin. The place smelled of leather, tobacco, and neglect, the particular mustiness of a house without a woman's touch. Eli had tried keeping it up at first, the way Martha would have wanted, but gradually he'd let things slide. What was the point of a clean house when the only one to see it was himself? "You need help, Eli," Reverend Morrison had told him last Sunday after service in town. The old minister had cornered him outside the small adobe church, his rheumy eyes full of concern. "A man can't live like this, alone with his ghosts." "I manage fine," Eli had replied, his voice rough from disuse. "No, you don't." The Reverend's tone was gentle but firm. "There's a widow woman, new to town, Clara Doyle. Lost her husband in a mining accident up in Colorado. She's looking for work, honest work, good with a house, I'm told, quiet, respectable." Eli had started to refuse, but something in the Reverend's expression stopped him. Perhaps it was pity, or perhaps it was the unspoken acknowledgement that they both knew Eli was slowly dying inside. One empty day at a time. Now. 3 days later. He waited. The Reverend had sent word that Mrs. Doyle would arrive this morning, brought out by Samuel, the church's handyman. Eli had spent the previous evening attempting to make the place less shameful, clearing the worst of the mess, beating the dust from one of the spare room's mattresses, fixing the broken latch on the kitchen door. Still, in the harsh morning light, the house looked like what it was, a monument to loneliness. The sound of wagon wheels on the dirt road pulled him from his thoughts. Samuel's old buckboard came into view, and beside him sat a figure in a dark dress and bonnet. Eli set down his cup and descended the porch steps, his boots raising small clouds of dust. As the wagon drew closer, he could make out more details. The woman was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30. She sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned slightly away as if studying the landscape. Even from a distance, he could see she was what folks called full-figured, not fat, but curved in the way women were meant to be before fashion magazines started telling them otherwise. Samuel pulled the horses to a stop. "Morning, Eli," he called out, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Brought you Mrs. Doyle, like the Reverend said." Eli nodded, his eyes on the woman as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. She moved carefully, as if unsure of her welcome. When she finally looked at him, he was struck by her eyes, gray as winter storms. Holding shadows he recognized. They were the eyes of someone who'd learned to expect little from life. "Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice soft but clear. She didn't smile, didn't simper or try to charm. She simply stood there, waiting. "Ma'am," Eli replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I appreciate you coming out." Samuel unloaded a single worn carpet bag and a small trunk, all her worldly possessions. Apparently, after extracting a promise from Eli to get her back to town if things didn't work out, The handyman climbed back onto his wagon and headed back the way he'd come, leaving them standing in the yard like strangers at a dance, neither knowing quite how to begin. "I suppose I should show you the house," Eli said finally. Clara nodded. "That would be good. Mr. Garrett." He led her inside, acutely aware of her presence behind him, the rustle of her skirts, the soft tread of her boots on the floorboards, in the kitchen. She paused, her gaze taking in the neglected stove, the pile of dishes, the film of grease on every surface. "I can start here," she said simply, "if you'll show me where things are kept." Eli opened cupboards, pointed out the root cellar entrance, explained the temperamental nature of the stove's damper. She listened without comment, those gray eyes missing nothing. When he showed her to the spare room, small but clean, with a narrow bed and a dresser missing one drawer pull, she set her carpet bag on the floor and removed her bonnet. Her hair was dark auburn, pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to diminish its luster. For a moment, standing in the doorway, Eli was struck by the strange intimacy of having a woman in his house again, the feminine presence that seemed to fill the empty spaces. "The Reverend said you're a widow," he said, then immediately regretted it. It wasn't his business. "Yes," she replied, not elaborating. Her fingers touched the wooden cross at her throat, a nervous gesture, quickly suppressed. "Well, I'll leave you to settle in. I've got work in the barn. Dinner's usually at 6, but—" He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "I'll have something ready." Clara said, "That's what I'm here for." Eli nodded and retreated, grateful to escape the sudden tension. In the barn, he busied himself with repairs to a bridle, but his mind kept returning to the woman in his house. There was something about her, a quality of stillness, as if she'd learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid notice. He recognized it because he'd seen it before, in women who'd lived with harsh men. The thought made him uncomfortable. The day passed slowly. From the barn, he could hear activity in the house, the clatter of dishes, the scrape of the stove being cleaned, the splash of water. Once, glancing through the kitchen window as he passed, he saw her on her knees, scrubbing the floor with a determination that seemed almost fierce. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked with old burns, cooking accidents, perhaps, or something else. As the sun began its descent, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Eli washed at the pump and entered the house. The transformation was remarkable. The kitchen gleamed, the windows sparkled, and the air smelled of soap and something else, fresh bread. Clara stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She'd changed into a different dress, this one protected by a clean apron. "Supper's nearly ready," she said without turning. "If you'd like to sit." Eli took his place at the table, feeling like a stranger in his own home. She served him beef stew, made from the preserved meat in the cellar, along with the fresh bread and butter. It was simple fare, but after months of his own crude cooking, it tasted like a feast. They ate in silence. The only sounds, the clink of spoons against bowls and the wind rattling the windows. Clara ate sparingly, her eyes downcast. When Eli reached for the salt, she flinched, just slightly, but he noticed. "It's good," he said awkwardly. "The stew. Been a while since I had a proper meal." "Thank you." Her response was barely above a whisper. After supper, she cleared the dishes and began washing them. Eli retreated to the porch, needing the space and air. The stars were beginning to emerge, brilliant in the clear desert sky. He could hear her moving about inside, setting the kitchen to rights. Later, much later, as he lay in his bed listening to the house settle around him, he heard something else, the muffled sound of crying from the spare room. It was soft, suppressed, as if she were holding a pillow over her face to muffle the sound. The weeping went on for a long time, and Eli lay rigid, torn between the urge to offer comfort and the knowledge that she wouldn't welcome it. Eventually, the crying stopped, replaced by silence, but Eli remained awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what sorrows the widow Clara Doyle carried. and why he suddenly cared. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon, its cry echoing across the empty land like a lament for all the broken souls trying to survive in this harsh and lonely place. The first night passed, and with it began the delicate dance of two damaged people learning to exist in the same space, each nursing wounds the other couldn't see, each wondering if healing was still possible in a world that had taken so much from them both. The days settled into a rhythm as predictable as the sun's path across the New Mexico sky. Clara rose before dawn, her footsteps soft as she moved through the house, starting the stove, preparing breakfast. Eli would find coffee waiting when he emerged from his room, strong and hot, along with biscuits or cornbread, eggs when the hens were laying, salt pork or bacon. They ate in companionable silence, each wrapped in their own thoughts. The work was hard. Water had to be hauled from the well, clothes scrubbed on the washboard until her knuckles were raw, floors swept and mopped daily against the endless invasion of dust. Clara threw herself into it with a fervor that puzzled Eli. She attacked each task as if dirt were an enemy to be vanquished, as if she could scour away something more than grime. 2 weeks into her employment, the heat came early. By noon, the sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the ranch with an intensity that made the air shimmer like water. Eli was mending fence posts in the far pasture when he remembered Clara had been working in the garden since morning, trying to coax life from the stubborn soil. He found her collapsed between the rows of struggling tomato plants, her face flushed and damp with perspiration, her breathing shallow. Without thinking, he scooped her up. She weighed more than he expected, soft and solid in his arms, and carried her to the house. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he caught the scent of her hair, soap and sweat and something faintly floral. Inside, he laid her on the kitchen floor where it was coolest, then pumped water into a basin. His hands shook slightly as he unbuttoned the top buttons of her dress, just enough to allow her to breathe easier. The wet cloth he placed on her forehead brought her around slowly, her gray eyes focusing on his face with confusion. Then, alarm. "You fainted," he said quickly, moving back to give her space. "Heat got you." Clara struggled to sit up, her hands flying to her dress buttons. The movement made her sway, and Eli steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. It was then, as she turned, that he saw it. The fabric of her dress had pulled away from her back, revealing a long, puckered scar that ran from her shoulder blade down toward her waist, the kind of scar a belt or strap might leave, or a whip. Their eyes met. Clara's face went pale beneath the flush of heat, and she jerked away from his touch, pulling her dress straight. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. Nothing to apologize for," Eli replied. Standing, "Heat like this can fell anyone. You should rest. The supper can wait, or I'll manage something. You rest." She nodded reluctantly and let him help her to her feet. At the doorway to her room, she paused. "Mr. Garrett? I'd be obliged if you didn't. That is, what you saw?" "I saw nothing," he said firmly. "Nothing that's my business. Anyway." Relief flickered across her features before she disappeared into her room. Eli stood in the hallway for a moment, hands clenched at his sides. He'd seen enough in the war to recognize the marks of deliberate cruelty. The thought of someone raising a hand to her, someone she'd trusted enough to marry, made something dark and violent stir in his chest. That evening, Clara emerged to prepare a simple meal, moving carefully but determined to fulfill her duties. They ate in their usual silence, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that they each carried hidden damage. As the days passed, small changes crept into their routine. Clara began to hum while she worked, softly, as if she didn't realize she was doing it. Old hymns, mostly, and sometimes songs Eli didn't recognize. He found himself lingering in the kitchen in the mornings, nursing his coffee while she kneaded bread or rolled out pie crust. "My mother taught me that one," she said one day, catching him watching her. "She said a good pie crust was worth its weight in gold out here." She was right, Eli allowed. Where was she from? Ohio, originally. Came west with my father after the war. Clara's hands stilled on the dough. He was difficult when he came back. The war changed him. Eli understood that all too well. It changed everyone who went. She glanced at him, a quick, assessing look. You were there. It wasn't a question. She'd probably known from the first day, something in his bearing, perhaps, or the way he startled at unexpected sounds. 3rd Georgia Infantry, he said. Sharpshooter. Clara nodded and went back to her pie crust. But that night, she made his favorite. Apple pie with a sugar crust that gleamed like gold in the lamplight. It was her way, he realized, of acknowledging what they'd shared without words. The evening storms came in late June, rolling across the plains like an invading army. The first one caught them unprepared. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged tears. The rain came in sheets, drumming on the roof with a violence that made conversation impossible. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the storm with an expression Eli couldn't read. When a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house, she wrapped her arms around herself. Beautiful and terrifying, she said softly, like everything out here. Eli moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Through the rain-blurred glass, they could see the lightning illuminating the landscape in stark, momentary tableau, the barn, the corral, the endless stretch of prairie beyond. First storm since you've been here, he observed. Yes, her reflection in the window looked ghostly, insubstantial. Thomas, my husband, died in a storm. Cave-in at the mine. They said the rain loosened the earth. It was the first time she'd volunteered information about her past. Eli waited, sensing there was more. I was glad, she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it over the rain. God forgive me, but I was glad. Before he could respond, she turned and fled to her room. Eli remained at the window, watching the storm and thinking about the kinds of marriages that made widows grateful for their loss. The next morning brought awkwardness. Clara avoided his eyes, busying herself with breakfast preparations. But when she set his plate before him, her hand briefly touched his shoulder. The lightest contact, there and gone, but deliberate. An apology, perhaps, or gratitude for his silence. As summer deepened, so did their companionship. Evenings found them on the porch, Eli smoking his pipe while Clara mended clothes or shelled peas. Sometimes they talked, careful, safe topics like the weather, the ranch, the news from town. Sometimes they sat in comfortable quiet, watching the stars emerge in the vast canvas of sky. One such evening, a pack of coyotes set up a chorus in the distance. Clara shivered despite the warmth. Lonely sound, she said. They're calling to each other, letting the pack know where they are. Still lonely, all that space between them. Eli glanced at her profile in the dim light. But they keep calling anyway, keep trying to close the distance. She turned to look at him then, something flickering in her eyes that made his breath catch. For a moment, the space between them seemed charged with possibility. Then she gathered her mending and stood. Getting late, she said, Good night, Mr. Garrett. Eli, he said suddenly. Just, Eli is fine. She paused at the door. Good night, Eli. His name in her voice stayed with him long after she'd gone inside. The day everything changed started like any other. Clara was hanging laundry on the line stretched between two posts near the house. Eli was in the barn, but he could see her through the open doors, the way the wind molded her dress to her body, the graceful arc of her arms as she reached up to pin a shirt, the way she pushed a strand of hair back from her face. He didn't see the rattlesnake coiled in the shade of the water barrel until he heard her scream. Eli ran. By the time he reached her, she was backing away from the snake, which had reared up in warning, its tail a blur of sound. Without thinking, he grabbed the hoe leaning against the house and dispatched the snake with one swift stroke. When he turned, Clara was standing with her hand pressed to her chest, breathing hard. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Before he could think better of it, Before all the reasons why he shouldn't came crashing down, he pulled her against him. She fit perfectly, her soft curves molding to the hard planes of his body. For a heartbeat, she stood rigid. Then her arms came up around him, and she was holding him just as tightly, her face buried in his shirt. They stood that way for a long moment, both trembling with more than fear. Then, as if waking from a dream, they broke apart. Clara's face was flushed, her eyes wide. Thank you, she stammered. The laundry. She fled, leaving Eli standing over the dead snake, his body thrumming with a need he'd thought buried with his wife. That night, he lay awake remembering the feel of her in his arms, the warmth of her breath through his shirt, the way she'd clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. In her room, Clara pressed her hands to her burning cheeks and tried to quiet her racing heart. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be held with gentleness, to feel safe in a man's arms. The wanting that flooded through her was terrifying in its intensity, and impossible. She was here to work, to earn her keep, not to complicate both their lives with feelings that had nowhere to go. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the solid warmth of him, could still smell the mix of leather and tobacco and honest sweat that was uniquely Eli. And for the first time in years, her body remembered it was more than just a vessel for work and worry. She was still a woman, with a woman's heart and a woman's desires, no matter how deeply she'd tried to bury them. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, the sound carrying across the darkness, and in two separate rooms, two lonely people lay awake, each thinking of the other, each wondering if the distance between them could ever be bridged, or if they were destined to remain like those coyotes, calling out across the vast empty spaces, hoping someone might answer back. The trip to town for supplies came 2 days after the rattlesnake incident. They'd barely spoken since that moment of embrace, moving around each other with careful politeness. Eli had considered going alone, but Clara needed fabric for new curtains and some personal items best chosen by her own hand. The wagon ride started in awkward silence, the wheels creaking in rhythm with the horse's steady plod. Clara sat as far from him as the bench allowed, her hands folded primly in her lap, bonnet shading her face. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and dust rose in small clouds with each turn of the wheels. "Should reach town by noon," Eli said, just to break the silence. "Yes," Clara replied, then seemed to realize more was required. "I have a list. Won't take long." They relapsed into quiet, but it was different from their usual comfortable silence. This fairly crackled with unspoken thoughts and suppressed feelings. The town of Cedar Ridge wasn't much. A main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other, with commerce filling the space between. As they pulled up to Henderson's general store, Eli noticed the usual collection of townswomen gathered on the boardwalk, their heads bent together in conversation. The talking stopped when they saw Clara. Eli helped her down from the wagon, feeling the eyes on them like physical weight. Clara must have felt it too, her shoulders tensed, and she kept her gaze fixed on the store entrance, inside, while Eli discussed feed prices with Henderson. Clara moved through the aisles selecting her items. He was aware of her location at every moment, as if she were a lodestone and he the needle of a compass. When Mrs. Henderson appeared to assist her with fabric selection, he caught snatches of their conversation. "Living out at the Garrett place, I hear," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am, as housekeeper." Housekeeper. The word carried weight, implications. "Well, I suppose a man needs help with a place that size." Clara's response was too quiet to hear, but Mrs. Henderson's next words rang clear. "Of course, some might say a respectable widow would find lodging in town. Take in washing, perhaps, rather than live unchaperoned with a man. But then, times are hard, aren't they?" Eli started toward them, anger rising, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Yes, times are hard," she said, steel beneath the softness. Hard enough that respectable widows sometimes have to choose between their reputation and eating regular meals. I choose to eat. The store fell silent. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red, and she turned away without another word. Clara continued her shopping as if nothing had happened, but Eli saw the tremor in her hands as she examined a bolt of calico. They were loading the wagon when the real trouble started. 3 women from the church auxiliary surrounded Clara like crows descending on carrion. Eli recognized the leader, Mrs. Prudence Whitmore, the banker's wife, a woman who wielded respectability like a weapon. "Mrs. Doyle," she began, her voice carrying across the street. "We're concerned about your situation, living alone with Mr. Garrett, no chaperone, no proper arrangements. It's not seemly. I keep house and cook meals," Clara said quietly. Nothing more. "But the appearance, another woman interjected, "is that you're warming his bed for a roof over your head." The crude insinuation hung in the air like a slap. Clara went white, then red. Her hands clenched in her skirts. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare I? You're the one flaunting yourself, taking advantage of a grieving widower?" "Enough." Eli's voice cut through the gathered crowd like a blade. He stepped beside Clara, not touching her but close enough that his intention was clear. "Mrs. Doyle is in my employ. Nothing more. Any man who says otherwise will answer to me. Any woman." He looked directly at Mrs. Whitmore. "Any woman who spreads such poison will answer to her husband when I explain why his bank no longer has my business." The banker's wife paled. The Garrett Ranch account wasn't huge, but in a town this size, every customer mattered. "We're only concerned for propriety," she said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "Then be concerned about your own." Eli touched his hat brim. "Ladies." He helped Clara onto the wagon and climbed up beside her. As they pulled away, he could hear the buzz of gossip resuming behind them. Clara sat rigid beside him, staring straight ahead. It wasn't until they'd cleared the town limits that he saw the tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Clara, don't!" Her voice was thick. "Please, just don't!" They rode in silence for a mile before she spoke again. "I should leave. Find work elsewhere. This isn't fair to you, to your reputation." Eli pulled the horses to a stop so abruptly she had to catch herself on the bench. He turned to face her fully. "You're not going anywhere. Not because of those harridan and their poisonous tongues. But they're right, aren't they? About how it looks? I don't give a damn how it looks. You should. This is your home. Your community." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. He took a breath. Tried again. "This place hasn't been home since Martha died. It's just land, buildings, work that needs doing. You want to know what makes it bearable?" She looked at him then, eyes still wet with tears. "Knowing there'll be coffee when I wake up, hearing you hum while you work, watching you hang laundry in the wind, coming in from the fields to find the windows clean and bread cooling on the sill. You've brought life back to that house. Clara, don't let their small-minded hatred drive you away." Her breath hitched. "Eli, stay, please." The words came out rough, revealing more than he'd intended. "The ranch is safer than anything you'd find in town, and I need the help." It was a lie, that last part. He didn't need help, he needed her. But that was too much truth for the bright afternoon sun. Clara studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll stay." They continued home in a different kind of silence. Not comfortable, exactly, but weighted with understanding. As they created a rise, the ranch spread before them, and Clara surprised him by speaking. "My husband," she said quietly, "used to say I was too proud, that I needed to learn my place." Her hand rose unconsciously to her throat. "He tried to teach me with his fists, and his belt, and sometimes—" She trailed off. Eli's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. "The scar you saw," she continued. That was from the night I told him I was leaving. He said he'd kill me before he'd let me shame him that way. A bitter smile touched her lips. 2 days later, the mine collapsed. They brought what was left of him home in a feed sack. I stood at his funeral in my best black dress and tried not to smile. Clara, I'm not a good woman. Eli, good women mourn their husbands. They don't feel relief. They don't wake up every morning grateful to be bruise-free. They don't— Her voice broke. Without thinking, Eli reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the heat. You're the best woman I know, he said simply. And any man who raised a hand to you deserved what he got and worse. She squeezed his hand, then gently pulled away. But some of the tension had left her shoulders. As they pulled into the ranch yard, Clara said, I'll stay, but perhaps we should be more careful, for both our sakes. Eli nodded, though everything in him rebelled against the idea of distance, of carefulness. If that's what you want. That night after supper, Eli retreated to the barn to mend harnesses, but his mind kept returning to the feel of Clara's hand in his, the way her fingers had trembled before gripping his with surprising strength. When he finally returned to the house, he found a plate covered with a cloth on the kitchen table, a slice of apple pie. Still warm. Clara's door was closed, but light leaked from beneath it. He stood in the hallway for a moment, fighting the urge to knock, to thank her for the pie, to tell her again that she was wanted here. Instead, he retreated to his own room, where he lay wakeful, thinking about bruises hidden beneath proper dresses and the kind of courage it took to survive that kind of marriage. The next morning, Clara had dark circles under her eyes but a determined set to her chin. As she poured his coffee, she said, I've been thinking, if I'm to stay, we need to make some things clear. Set boundaries. Eli nodded, though his heart sank. What kind of boundaries? I'll continue to keep house and cook, but perhaps it would be best if we took our evening meals separately, and I'll no longer sit on the porch in the evenings. It's too— She searched for the word. Familiar? If that's what you think best, Eli said carefully, though the thought of losing those quiet evening moments felt like losing a limb. I do. But she didn't meet his eyes as she said it. For a week, they maintained the new arrangement. Clara served his supper, then retreated to her room with her own plate. The porch sat empty in the evenings while Eli smoked his pipe alone. The house felt colder, despite the July heat. Then came the night of the full moon. Eli couldn't sleep. The silver light poured through his window like liquid mercury, and the house felt too quiet, too empty. He rose and walked to the kitchen for water, and found Clara sitting at the table in her nightgown and wrap, a cup of tea cooling before her. Couldn't sleep either, he asked softly. She shook her head. The moon, it's so bright. He poured himself water and sat across from her. Propriety be damned. In the moonlight, she looked younger, softer. The harsh lines that life had carved into her face were smoothed away. I miss the evenings, she said suddenly. On the porch, watching the stars come out. So do I. They sat in silence, the moon painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Finally, Clara spoke again. I'm tired of being afraid. Afraid of what? Everything. What people think. What might happen? What I might feel? She looked at him directly for the first time in days. What I already feel. Eli's heart hammered in his chest. Clara. No, let me say this. She took a shaky breath. I came here planning to work, save money, move on, keep my head down and my heart locked away. But you— She laughed, a sound caught between joy and despair. You with your quiet ways and your gentle hands and the way you defended me in town, you're making it very hard to remember why I need to keep my distance. Eli stood slowly, moved around the table. Clara watched him come, her eyes wide but unafraid. When he held out his hand, she took it and let him pull her to her feet. Maybe, he said roughly. We're both tired of being afraid. She swayed toward him, and he met her halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Then Clara made a small sound in her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Clara's hands rested on his chest, and he could feel her trembling. "This complicates everything," she whispered. "I know. People will talk more than ever. Let them." She pulled back enough to study his face. "Are you sure? This is your home, your reputation." He silenced her with another kiss, pouring into it all the loneliness of the past 2 years, all the longing of recent weeks. When he raised his head, her eyes were dazed. "You're my home," he said simply. "The rest is just noise." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She lifted her hand to his face, tracing the lines the war and weather had carved there. "Oh, Eli, what are we doing?" "Living," he answered. "Finally living." They stood there in the moonlit kitchen, holding each other, both afraid to let go. Outside, the coyotes had started their nightly chorus, but for once, the sound didn't seem lonely. It seemed like a celebration, a wild joy thrown up against the star-filled sky. Eventually, propriety and sense reasserted themselves. They stepped apart, though Eli kept hold of her hand. "We should. Think about this," Clara said, though her fingers tightened on his. "Be sensible." "Tomorrow," Eli agreed. "We'll be sensible tomorrow." But as she turned to go back to her room, he caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. She gasped softly, then fled, leaving him standing in the moonlight, his heart racing like a young man's. In her room, Clara pressed her fingers to her lips, feeling them still tingling from his kiss. She'd been so careful, so guarded, for so long. But Eli had slipped past her defenses without even trying, simply by being himself, steady, quiet, kind. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, she felt hope unfurling in her chest like a flower reaching for the sun. Tomorrow would bring complications, decisions, the need to face what was growing between them. But tonight, in the silver wash of moonlight, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't only for other people. Maybe even the broken could be mended. Maybe even the lost could find their way home. The morning after their moonlit kiss dawned clear and bright, but inside the house, a new tension hummed in the air. Clara moved through her morning routine with careful precision, her cheeks flushing whenever their eyes met. Eli found himself watching her openly now, the way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear, how her brow furrowed slightly when she concentrated on measuring flour, the unconscious grace in her movements. "More coffee?" she asked, and when she leaned over to pour, he caught her scent, soap and sunshine and something uniquely Clara. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and they both froze. The memory of last night's kiss hung between them, unspoken but present as surely as if it had taken physical form. "I thought I'd work on the fence in the south pasture today," Eli said, desperate to break the charged silence. "I'll pack you something for midday." Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They were being so careful with each other, as if they were made of glass and might shatter at the slightest touch. But beneath the carefulness ran a current of awareness that made every mundane interaction feel significant. The dance continued for 3 days. They found excuses to be in the same room, then reasons to maintain distance. Clara began joining him for evening meals again, but their conversation was stilted, full of long pauses where words wanted to tumble out but didn't. On the third evening, as Clara cleared the dishes, she finally spoke what they'd both been thinking. "We can't go on like this." Eli looked up from his coffee. "No," he agreed. "We can't." She set down the plates and turned to face him, wringing her hands in her apron. "What happened the other night was the most honest thing that's happened in this house in 2 years. Eli finished. Clara's breath caught. "Eli." He stood, moving toward her with the deliberate stride of a man who'd made up his mind. "I've spent 3 days trying to convince myself to be sensible, to keep my distance. to remember all the reasons this is complicated. He stopped just out of arm's reach. But I'm done lying to myself. I want you here, Clara. Not as my housekeeper, as mine. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was shaking her head. You don't understand. I can't be what you need. I'm broken. Eli, my marriage broke something in me that I don't think can be fixed. Then we'll be broken together, he said simply. A sob escaped her, and suddenly she was in his arms, her face buried against his chest. He held her as she cried, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring nonsense words of comfort. When the storm of tears finally passed, she pulled back enough to look up at him. I'm frightened, she admitted. So am I, but I'm more frightened of going back to the way things were, the empty house, the silence, the feeling that life was something that happened to other people. Clara reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling. You make me want things I thought I'd never want again, a home, a future, someone to... She stopped, blushing. Someone to love, Eli suggested gently. She nodded, unable to speak. This time when they kissed, it was with the knowledge that they were choosing this, choosing each other, despite all the reasons they shouldn't. When they finally broke apart, Clara was smiling through her tears. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Eli said. We stop pretending. We stop being careful. We start living like two people who... He paused, gathering courage. Like two people who are falling in love. Falling? Clara's smile widened. Oh, Eli, I think I fell the day you defended me in town. Maybe even before that. Joy bloomed in his chest, unexpected and overwhelming. He laughed, the first real laugh to echo in these rooms since Martha's death, and spun Clara around the kitchen. She laughed too, clutching his shoulders, her skirts billowing. When he set her down, they were both breathless. The air between them crackled with possibility and desire. Clara's hair had come partly loose from its pins, and Eli reached up to tuck a strand behind her ear. We should take things slowly, Clara said, though her eyes suggested she wanted anything but slowly. Eli agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek, but slowly proved difficult when every shared meal became an exercise in restraint, when every accidental touch sent fire through their veins. They returned to their evening ritual on the porch, but now Clara sat closer, sometimes letting her hand rest on the arm of his chair, close enough to touch if he shifted slightly. A week passed in this sweet agony of almost touches and lingering looks. Then came the night of the summer storm. It rolled in from the west, turning the sky an ominous green-black. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. Going to be a bad one, Eli said, securing the shutters. Clara helped him prepare, bringing in anything that might blow away, making sure the animals were secure. By the time the first fat raindrops began to fall, they were both windblown and breathing hard from exertion. The storm hit with a fury that shook the house. Lightning crashed so close they could smell the ozone, and thunder followed immediately, making Clara jump. The temperature continued to plummet, and soon hail was mixed with the rain, pounding on the roof like hammers. They sat in the kitchen, the lamp flickering with each gust of wind. Clara had made tea, but her hands shook as she lifted the cup. I hate storms, she said quietly. Ever since, another crash of thunder cut her off, and the lamp went out, plunging them into darkness. Clara made a small sound of distress. It's all right, Eli said, reaching for her hand in the dark. I'll light another. Lightning illuminated the room in stark relief, showing Clara's terrified face. In the darkness that followed, she was suddenly pressed against him, shaking. The mine, she whispered. The storm that night, the sound it made when it collapsed. Eli wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. You're safe. I've got you. They stood that way as the storm raged, Clara trembling against him. Gradually, her shaking eased, but she didn't pull away. If anything, she pressed closer. Eli? Her voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of rain. Take me to bed." He went very still. "Clara, please." She pulled back enough that he could see her face in the intermittent lightning flashes. I need to feel alive. I need to feel something besides fear. I need you." He could have been noble, could have insisted they wait, think things through in the calm light of day. Instead, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her through the dark house to his room. In the flashes of lightning, they came together with desperate tenderness, two people who had forgotten what it meant to be touched with love, relearning the language of desire. Clara's soft gasps were lost in the thunder, and when Eli kissed the scar on her back, she wept, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sweetness of being cherished. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the storm begin to pass. Clara traced patterns on Eli's chest, marveling at the solid warmth of him. "I didn't know it could be like that," she whispered. "Gentle, caring, I didn't know." Eli pressed a kiss to her forehead, his own heart too full for words. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but he felt no regret, only a bone-deep rightness, as if all the broken pieces of his life had suddenly shifted into place. "Stay," he said against her hair. "Not just tonight, always." Clara lifted her head to look at him. In the darkness, he could just make out the curve of her smile. "Yes," she said simply. They fell asleep as the storm moved east, leaving behind the clean scent of rain and the promise of a new day. When dawn broke, it found them still entwined, two souls who had weathered their own storms and found safe harbor in each other's arms. The change in their relationship was obvious to anyone who cared to look. Clara sang as she worked now, full-throated hymns and folk songs that filled the house with music. Eli found excuses to come in from the fields, a forgotten tool, a quick question that always seemed to result in stolen kisses in the pantry or quick embraces by the stove. They took their meals together, hands touching across the table, conversation flowing easily now that the barriers between them had fallen. In the evenings, Clara sat in Eli's lap on the porch, his arms around her as they watched the stars emerge. "We should make it official," Eli said one such evening. "Make you an honest woman." Clara laughed softly. "I think that ship has sailed." "I'm serious." He turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "Marry me, Clara. Be my wife in truth, not just in practice." Her breath caught. "Eli, are you sure? People will talk." "They're already talking. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." He cradled her face in his hands. "I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning knowing you're mine by law and by choice. I want to give you my name, my protection, everything I have." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, oh, yes." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and promise into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "When?" Clara asked. "Soon as Reverend Morrison can manage it. Unless you want something fancy." "No," she said quickly. "Simple is perfect. Just us and the Reverend and whoever we need for witnesses." Eli grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "Then I'll ride to town tomorrow. Talk to the Reverend. What if he refuses? After all the talk." "He won't." Eli's voice was confident. "Morrison's a good man. He sees past gossip to the truth of things." Clara nestled back against his chest, feeling safe and cherished and dizzy with happiness. "Mrs. Eli Garrett." She tried out. "Clara Garrett. Has a nice sound to it." Eli agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. In the distance, a coyote called, but tonight it sounded like a celebration, a wild song of joy thrown up to the stars. "No more fear," Clara said softly. "No more careful distance. No more pretending we don't feel what we feel. No more," Eli agreed. "From now on, just truth, just love, just us." As if in agreement, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Clara gasped and pointed, and Eli pulled her closer. "Make a wish," he said. She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I already have everything I could wish for." Eli thought of the empty years behind him, the grief and loneliness that had seemed insurmountable. Now, with Clara warm in his arms and their future spreading before them, those dark days seemed like a different lifetime. He'd been merely existing, going through the motions of living, but Clara had brought him back to life, just as he'd done for her. "I love you," he said, needing to say the words again, to make them real. "I love you too," Clara replied, turning to kiss him softly. "My unlikely cowboy, my second chance, my salvation," Eli murmured against her lips. They stayed on the porch until the chill drove them inside, but even then, they were reluctant to part. In the end, propriety lost the battle, and Clara followed Eli to his room, their room now. As they lay together in the darkness, Clara said, "I never thought I'd be happy again. I thought Thomas had killed that part of me." "And I thought it had died with Martha," Eli replied, pulling her closer. "But maybe happiness isn't something that can be killed. Maybe it just goes dormant, waiting for the right person to wake it up again." Clara smiled against his chest. "Then we woke each other up. That we did." Eli agreed. "That we did." Outside, the New Mexico night wrapped around the little ranch house like a blessing. Inside, two people who had known too much sorrow finally rested in the peace they'd found in each other's arms. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as always in this harsh land, but they would face it together, and that, they had learned, made all the difference. The happiness was short-lived. Eli rode to town the next morning as promised, but when he returned late in the afternoon, his face was grave. Clara knew before he spoke that something was wrong. "The Reverend will marry us," he said slowly, hanging his hat by the door. "But he warned me the town's in an uproar. Mrs. Whitmore and her group have been stirring things up." Clara's hands stilled on the bread dough she'd been kneading. "What kind of things?" "Ugly talk, saying that you came here with intentions, that you seduced a grieving widower for his property." His jaw clenched. "I wanted to throttle them all." "Oh." The word came out small, defeated. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Movements mechanical. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I—" "Don't." Eli crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "Don't let their poison into your head. We know the truth." "Do we?" Clara pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "It must look exactly like they say, a desperate widow taking advantage." "Stop it." His voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral. "You didn't seduce me, Clara. If anything, I pursued you. And as for my property," he laughed bitterly, 500 acres of stubborn dirt and a house held together by prayer and paint. If you're after riches, you've badly miscalculated." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. "The house isn't that bad. Only because you've made it livable again." He reached for her, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I don't care what they say. Do you?" Clara wanted to say no, wanted to be strong, but the words that came out were different. "I've been the subject of gossip before. When Thomas was alive, people knew, I think, about what he did. They'd see the bruises, the way I flinched, but no one ever said anything directly, just whispered behind their hands." She looked up at him. "I thought I was past caring what people thought, but this is different. This is us they're talking about, our love, making it dirty and calculated when it's the cleanest thing in my life." Eli pulled her against him, and she went willingly, burying her face in his shirt. They stood that way for a long moment before he spoke again. "We don't have to stay here after we're married. We could go somewhere else, start fresh where no one knows our history." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Leave the ranch? But this is your home. Home is where you are," he said simply. "The land will survive without me." For a moment, Clara was tempted. A new start. A place where they were just Mr. and Mrs. Garrett. Not the scandal of Cedar Ridge. But then she thought of how Eli looked when he surveyed his fields, the pride in his eyes when the cattle were healthy, the way he knew every acre like the back of his hand. "No," she said firmly. We're not running. This is your land, your legacy. I won't let small-minded gossips drive us away. Our land, Eli corrected. Our legacy. The words warmed her even as worry gnawed at her stomach. But she managed a smile. Then we'll face them down together. Eli kissed her forehead. That's my brave girl. But bravery was harder to maintain as the days passed. Their trip to town for supplies became an ordeal of turned backs and cold shoulders. The general store suddenly had trouble filling their orders. The blacksmith was too busy to repair Eli's plow. The breaking point came a week later. Clara had been feeling poorly for several mornings, fighting nausea that came in waves. She attributed it to nerves at first, the stress of their situation. But as she stood over the wash basin one morning, losing what little breakfast she'd managed, the truth hit her like a lightning bolt. She sank to the floor of her room, hands pressed to her still flat stomach, a baby. She was carrying Eli's child. Joy and terror warred in her chest. A baby meant roots, permanence, a future stretching ahead. But it also meant ammunition for the gossips, proof of what they'd whispered about her morals. She was still sitting there when Eli found her, having heard her distress from the hallway. Clara, what's wrong? Are you ill? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. He dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms. Talk to me. You're scaring me. She had to try twice to get the words out. I'm with child. Eli went perfectly still. For a horrible moment, Clara thought he was upset, regretting everything. Then he pulled back to look at her face, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. A baby? He whispered. Our baby? Clara nodded, searching his face. Are you happy? Happy? He laughed, the sound caught between joy and disbelief. Clara, He stopped, overwhelmed, and kissed her instead, pouring all his wonder and love into the contact. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing. Eli pressed his hand to her stomach reverently. A baby, he repeated. When? Early spring, I think, March or April. We'll be married long before then. Make it all proper and legal. His face darkened. Though the gossips will count months, I'm sure. Let them count. Clara covered his hand with hers. Our child was conceived in love, not shame. I won't apologize for that. But as the day wore on, Clara's initial joy gave way to worry. She'd lost a baby before, early in her marriage to Thomas. The grief had been complicated by relief. Bringing a child into that household would have been cruel. But now, with Eli, she wanted this baby with a fierce desperation that frightened her. That evening, as they sat together on the porch, she finally voiced her fears. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose it? Eli's arm tightened around her. We'll face that if it comes. But Clara, you can't live in fear of what might happen. I know. But Martha? She stopped, realizing what she'd said. Martha lost 3 before the one that killed her. Eli said quietly, I know the fear, Clara, better than you might think. But this is different. You're strong, and we'll get you the best care possible. Clara turned in his arms. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought up. She's part of our story, whether we speak of her or not. Eli said, just like Thomas is. They shaped who we are, led us to each other. I won't pretend Martha didn't exist, and I don't expect you to pretend about Thomas. Clara kissed him softly. You're a good man, Eli Garrett. I'm trying to be, he said. For you, for our child. They were still sitting there, making quiet plans for the future, when they heard the horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Eli stood, moving Clara behind him as riders appeared on the road. 6 men, faces grim in the fading light. Garrett, the lead rider called out. It was Harold Whitmore, the banker, with several other prominent townsmen behind him. We need to talk. So talk, Eli said, not moving from the porch. Whitmore dismounted, the others following suit. It's about your situation with Mrs. Doyle. My fiancée, Eli corrected coolly. Soon to be my wife. That's what we need to discuss." Whitmore's face was florid, whether from the ride or righteous indignation. Clara couldn't tell. "The town council has met. We've decided it would be best for everyone if Mrs. Doyle found employment elsewhere. We're prepared to offer her a sum to relocate. Get off my land." Eli's voice was deadly quiet. "Now, be reasonable." "I said get off my land." Eli stepped down from the porch. "Before I forget my manners entirely." One of the other men, younger and clearly fortified by whiskey, sneered. "Defending your woman's honor? What honor? Everyone knows what she is. A scheming—" He never finished the sentence. Eli's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. The other men surged forward, and suddenly the yard was a melee of flying fists and shouted curses. "Stop!" Clara ran down the steps. "Stop this!" But the men were beyond hearing. It was 6 against 1, and while Eli was holding his own, the odds were against him. Clara grabbed the shotgun from inside the door and fired it into the air. The blast froze everyone in place. She stood there in the gathering dusk, the gun steady in her hands, looking like an avenging angel in her simple dress and apron. "The next shot won't be a warning," she said calmly. "Now get on your horses and get out." Whitmore helped the younger man to his feet. His nose was bloody, and he looked at Clara with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "Both of you, this isn't over." "Yes, it is," Clara said, "because if any of you set foot on this property again, I'll shoot first and ask questions later. And before you go running to the sheriff, remember that you came here in the dark, 6 armed men against 1. Any court would call it self-defense." The men retreated to their horses, muttering threats and curses. As they rode away, Clara lowered the gun with shaking hands. Eli came to her, a bruise already forming on his cheek. "Are you all right?" they asked simultaneously, then laughed shakily. "I'm fine," Eli said, though his knuckles were bloody. "You were magnificent. Remind me never to make you angry." Clara set the gun aside and examined his injuries. "We need to clean these cuts, and that eye's going to swell." As she tended his wounds in the kitchen, Eli watched her with something approaching awe. "Where did you learn to handle a shotgun like that?" "My father taught me, before he got mean, said a woman alone should know how to defend herself." She dabbed at a cut on his lip. "I never thought I'd need it." "I'm glad you did." He caught her hand. "Clara, what they said was ugliness born of small minds." She finished. "I know, but Eli, this won't be the end of it. They'll make our lives miserable. Then we'll be miserable together." He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "I'm not giving you up, not for them, not for anyone." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "What kind of world are we bringing a child into?" "Our world," Eli said firmly. "Where love matters more than gossip, where courage counts more than conformity, where 2 broken people can build something whole and good together." Despite everything, Clara felt hope kindle in her chest. "When you put it that way, it's the only way I know to put it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll get married this week, even if I have to ride 3 towns over to find a preacher, and then we'll face whatever comes together." Clara lifted her head to look at him. His face was battered but determined, and she'd never loved him more. Together, she agreed. But as they prepared for bed that night, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that worse was coming. The men who'd ridden out here weren't the type to accept defeat easily, and with a baby on the way, the stakes had never been higher. In bed, Eli curved his body around hers protectively, one hand splayed over her stomach. "I won't let anything happen to you," he murmured against her hair. "Either of you." Clara believed he meant it, but as she lay awake listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, she wondered if love and determination would be enough against the forces aligning against them. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering in the distance like an omen. She pressed closer to Eli's warmth and tried not to think about what rough weather might be heading their way. For tonight, They were safe in each other's arms. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, love was enough. The first drops of rain began to fall as Clara finally drifted off to sleep. Her last conscious thought a fierce vow. Whatever came, she would protect this happiness they'd found, this family they were building. She'd survived Thomas's fists and society's scorn. She could survive this too. She had to, for Eli, for their unborn child, for the future they both deserved. The storm broke in earnest just before dawn, but Clara slept through it, safe in the circle of Eli's arms, dreaming of spring and babies and a love strong enough to weather any storm. The morning brought a decision that tore Eli's heart in two. He found Clara in the kitchen, pale and drawn after another bout of morning sickness, trying to prepare breakfast with shaking hands. "That's enough," he said, taking the skillet from her. "You need to rest." "I'm fine," she protested, but her wan complexion told a different story. "No, you're not, and after last night—" He set the skillet aside and took her hands. "Clara, I think you should go away for a while, just until things calm down." She jerked back as if he'd slapped her. "You're sending me away?" "Not sending, keeping you safe. You and the baby. I couldn't live with myself if something happened because of my stubbornness." "Our stubbornness," Clara corrected, her chin lifting. "And I'm not leaving." "Clara, no." She stood, swaying slightly but steadying herself against the table. "You think I'm some delicate flower who needs protecting? I survived Thomas for 5 years. I survived being alone and desperate. I can survive a few small-minded townspeople. This is different. You're with child now, our child. And those men last night, they'll be back." Clara moved to him, framing his battered face with her hands. "Then we'll face them together. I won't run. Eli, not from you, not from our life here. This is my home now, our home." He pulled her against him, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever known. Good match for the most stubborn man," she murmured against his chest. They stood that way until Clara's stomach rebelled again, sending her rushing for the basin. As Eli held her hair back and murmured soothing words, he made a silent vow. If she wouldn't leave for her safety, then he'd have to find another way to protect her. The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, as Eli worked on reinforcing the barn doors, a lone rider approached. He tensed, hand moving to the rifle propped nearby, then relaxed as he recognized Reverend Morrison's gray mare. The elderly minister dismounted stiffly, looking every one of his 70 years. "Eli, heard there was some trouble out here last night." "Word travels fast." "Always does in a small town." Morrison studied Eli's bruised face. "Also heard you and Mrs. Doyle are planning to wed. If we can find someone willing to perform the ceremony," Eli said bitterly. Morrison smiled. "How about an old preacher who's more interested in love than gossip?" Eli stared. "You'd marry us, despite what everyone's saying?" "Son, I've been ministering in this territory for 30 years. I've seen every kind of human folly and human grace. What I see here is 2 people who found love after loss. That's something to celebrate, not condemn, Reverend." Eli's voice was rough. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll bring your Clara to the church tomorrow evening. We'll need witnesses. I'll bring my wife, and Samuel, if he's willing." "The town council can go hang," Morrison said mildly. "Pardon my language, but I answer to a higher authority than Harold Whitmore and his ilk." When Eli told Clara the news, she burst into tears. Happy ones. For once. They spent the evening in a flurry of preparation. Clara altered one of her better dresses, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Eli trimmed his hair and beard, polished his boots, and unearthed his one good shirt from the bottom of a drawer. "I wish I had something finer for you," Clara said wistfully, smoothing the dress. "A real wedding gown? You'll be the most beautiful bride that church has ever seen," Eli said, meaning every word. The next day crawled by. They went through their chores mechanically, both nervous and excited. As afternoon faded to evening, they dressed carefully and hitched up the wagon. Clara had picked wildflowers from beside the creek, Indian paintbrush and prairie roses, for a small bouquet. The ride to town was tense. Every shadow could hide threat. Every approaching rider might bring trouble. But they reached the church without incident, finding it lit from within, warm light spilling from the windows. Inside, Reverend Morrison waited at the altar with his wife, a plump, kind-faced woman who immediately embraced Clara. Samuel stood to one side, grinning broadly. "Didn't think I'd miss this," the handyman said. "Been waiting for Eli here to come to his senses." The ceremony was simple but perfect. Morrison spoke of love's power to heal, to transform, to create new beginnings from broken pieces. When he asked if anyone objected, Clara held her breath, half expecting the doors to burst open. But there was only peaceful silence. "Do you, Eli, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Eli said, his voice strong and certain. "Do you, Clara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Clara whispered, then louder. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Eli." The kiss was sweet and full of promise. When they parted, Clara was crying again, but smiling through her tears. Mrs. Morrison produced a small cake she'd baked for the occasion, and they shared it in the vestry, toasting with apple cider. "It's not much of a wedding feast," the minister's wife apologized. "It's perfect," Clara assured her. "All of this is perfect." As they prepared to leave, Morrison pulled Eli aside. "There's something else. My wife's cousin runs a boarding house in Las Cruces. She's looking for help, cooking, cleaning, the like. Good woman. Discreet. If you needed to send Clara somewhere safe for a time." "She won't go," Eli said. "Believe me, I've tried." "Then keep the option in mind. Sometimes circumstances change our minds for us." The ride home was quieter, both of them absorbed in the magnitude of what they'd done. Clara kept touching the simple gold band on her finger, Eli's mother's ring, which he'd kept hidden away since Martha's death. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Garrett?" Eli asked as they turned into the ranch road. "Like coming home," Clara said simply. They were still a quarter mile from the house when Eli pulled up sharp. Something was wrong. The front door stood open, lamplight spilling out. They never left lamps burning when they were gone. "Stay here," Eli said, reaching for his rifle. "Not a chance," Clara replied, checking the load on the shotgun. They approached cautiously, every nerve strung tight. The house was ransacked, furniture overturned, dishes smashed, flour and sugar strewn across the kitchen floor. Scrawled across the wall in what looked like lamp oil was one word: leave. Clara made a small sound of distress, turning in a slow circle to take in the destruction. Her careful homemaking, all the scrubbing and organizing and care she'd put into making the house a home, destroyed in minutes. "I'm sorry," Eli said helplessly. "Clara, I'm so sorry." But instead of tears, fury blazed in her eyes. "No, they don't get to do this. They don't get to drive us out." She grabbed a broom and began sweeping broken crockery into a pile. "We'll clean it up, every bit of it, and we'll go on living our lives right here, right under their noses. Clara, I mean it, Eli, this is our home. Our marriage bed is upstairs. Our child will be born here. I won't let them take that from us." They worked through the night, cleaning and straightening. Some things were beyond salvage. The good dishes, several pieces of furniture, Clara's carefully tended sourdough starter. But by dawn, the house was livable again, if barer than before. As the sun rose, they sat on the porch, exhausted but defiant. Clara leaned against Eli's shoulder, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if they come back?" she asked quietly. "Then we'll be ready," Eli said. "I'll rig some alarms. Tin cans on wire, that sort of thing. And I'll teach you to shoot better. Not just the shotgun, the rifle too. Eli. Clara sat up to look at him. What if I did go away, just until the baby comes, then return when things have died down? The words cost her. He could see it in her face. The same thought had been forming in his mind as they cleaned up the wreckage of their home. Morrison's wife has that cousin in Las Cruces, he said slowly. You'd be safe there. Anonymous. Just another widow helping with the boarding house. And you? I'd stay here, keep the ranch going, visit when I could. Then, after the baby's born, after some time has passed, they'd assume I'd left for good. Clara finished. The righteous women would crow about driving out the Scarlet Woman. Then I could return quietly, as your wife, with a child, a fait accompli. It would mean months apart, Eli said, hating the idea even as he recognized its wisdom. But we'd have a lifetime after. Clara said, she touched his face. I don't want to go. Every part of me rebels against it. But our child, I can't risk our child for my pride. They were quiet as the morning brightened around them, each lost in thought. Finally, Clara spoke again. 1 week. Give me 1 week as your wife in this house, then I'll go. Eli pulled her close. A week it is. That week was bittersweet perfection. They moved through their days like dancers, aware that every moment was precious because it was numbered. Clara taught Eli her mother's recipes, writing them down in careful script. He showed her the account books, the running of the ranch, treating her as the true partner she was. At night, they came together with desperate tenderness, trying to store up enough touch to last the coming separation. They talked for hours about their childhoods, their dreams, their plans for when she returned. Clara told him about the baby she'd lost, the complicated grief of mourning a child she'd been terrified to bring into Thomas's house. Eli spoke of Martha's pregnancies, the hope and devastation of each loss. This one will be different, Clara said fiercely. This child is conceived in love, wanted with joy. He or she will live. Eli, I know it. I believe you, he said, and found that he did. On their last morning, Eli woke to find Clara already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She wore his shirt, and with the light behind her, he could see the slight thickening of her waist, the first visible sign of their child. Second thoughts? He asked. She turned, attempting a smile. 100 thoughts, but I'll still go. They made the journey to town separately. Eli first with her trunk, to arrange things with Morrison and the stage. Clara following later to avoid being seen leaving with him. At the stage depot, they had only moments for goodbye, aware of watching eyes. Write to me, Clara whispered, gripping his hands. Even if I can't write back safely, every week. He promised. And I'll come when I can. Take care of yourself. Don't let the loneliness eat you up. I need you whole when I return. The stage driver called for passengers. Eli helped Clara up, their hands lingering until the last possible moment. I love you, he said, not caring who heard. I love you too, she replied, tears streaming. Always. Then the stage was rolling, taking her away in a cloud of dust. Eli stood watching until it disappeared, feeling as though half his heart had been torn from his chest. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of his life. The house, so recently filled with her presence, felt like a tomb. Her apron still hung on the peg by the stove. Her hairbrush lay on the dresser. The bed still smelled of her perfume. Eli sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, and let himself grieve for the separation, for the unfairness of it all, for the months ahead without her. Then he straightened, wiped his eyes, and began composing his first letter. My dearest Clara, he wrote, you've been gone 3 hours, and already the house echoes with your absence. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, matching his mood. But beyond them, if he looked hard enough, he could see clear sky. The storm would pass, as all storms did, and when it cleared, Clara would come home. He had to believe that. It was the only thing that would get him through the long, lonely months ahead. The winter was the hardest Eli had ever endured. And that included the war years. Snow came early and stayed late, blanketing the ranch in white silence that seemed to echo the emptiness in his heart. He threw himself into work, mending fences, tending cattle, making repairs that had been neglected for months. Anything to exhaust himself enough to sleep without dreaming of Clara. Her letters came sporadically, delivered through Reverend Morrison to avoid suspicion. Each one was a lifeline. "My dearest husband," she wrote in December. "The baby moves now. Little flutters like butterfly wings. Mrs. Hartley, the boarding house owner, has been so kind. She knows our story and keeps my secret well. I help with cooking and cleaning, and she insists I rest when I tire. But oh, Eli, I miss you so terribly, it's like a physical ache." He wrote back faithfully every week, though he knew not all his letters would reach her safely. He told her about the ranch, the weather, the small daily details of life that seemed meaningless without her to share them. He wrote about his love, his longing, his dreams of her return. In January, a blizzard trapped him in the house for 3 days. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows. On the second night, half mad with isolation, he thought he heard Clara's voice in the wind, calling his name. He actually opened the door, peering into the white void, before reality reasserted itself. The next morning, he found he'd developed a fever. For 2 days he burned and shivered, too weak to tend the fire properly. In his delirium, Clara was there, cooling his forehead with a damp cloth, spooning broth between his cracked lips, murmuring words of comfort. When the fever finally broke, the disappointment of finding himself alone was almost worse than the illness. February brought a brief thaw and a chance to visit Las Cruces. He told the townspeople he was going to look at breeding stock, enduring their knowing looks and whispered comments. The truth was worth any amount of gossip. He found Clara at the boarding house, fuller figured now, her pregnancy obvious beneath her loose dress. When she saw him in the parlor doorway, her face lit up like sunrise. "Eli," they were circumspect in front of the other boarders, but Mrs. Hartley, a widow herself who understood love and loss, ushered them to Clara's small room and left them alone. The moment the door closed, they were in each other's arms. Eli held her carefully, mindful of her expanded middle, marveling at the changes in her body. "Let me look at you," he said, pulling back. "You're beautiful. You glow." Clara laughed, though tears streaked her cheeks. "I waddle like a duck and can't see my feet, but thank you for lying." "Not lying." He placed his hands on her belly and was rewarded with a strong kick. His eyes widened. "Was that your son or daughter saying hello?" Clara confirmed, covering his hands with hers. "He's strong. Eli, or she, active, especially at night." They spent every possible moment together over the next 2 days. Clara showed him the baby clothes she'd been sewing, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. They walked in the boarding house garden, arms linked, talking about everything and nothing. At night, they lay together in her narrow bed. Eli's hand splayed protectively over her belly, feeling their child move. 2 more months, Clara said into the darkness. "Maybe less, then I can come home." "The moment you're able to travel," Eli promised. "I'll come for you both myself." Leaving was agony, but Eli forced himself to go before his extended absence raised too many questions. The ride back to Cedar Ridge seemed endless, and the ranch, when he reached it, felt more desolate than ever. March arrived with unexpected warmth, melting the snow and turning the roads to mud. Eli was repairing the chicken coop when he saw a rider approaching. Samuel, riding hard. His heart stopped. Something was wrong. "Clara, the baby." "What is it?" he called, running to meet him. Samuel swung down, breathing hard. "Letter came for you, from Las Cruces. Morrison said to bring it quick." Eli tore open the envelope with shaking hands. "Mrs." Hartley's unfamiliar script swam before his eyes. "Mr. Garrett, I write with urgent news. Clara's time has come early. The birth was difficult, but both mother and child survive. A son, small but strong. However, Clara lost much blood and remains weak. The doctor says she must not travel for at least 6 weeks." She asks me to tell you she loves you and to kiss your son for her. A son. They had a son." Eli read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Then he was moving, saddling his best horse, throwing supplies into saddlebags. "Tell Morrison I've gone to Las Cruces," he told Samuel. "Emergency with the breeding stock I was looking at. I'll be back when I can." He rode through the night, changing horses at way stations, driven by a need to see them that bordered on madness. Dawn found him mud-splattered and exhausted, pounding on the boarding house door. Mrs. Hartley, still in her wrapper, took one look at him and smiled. "She's been asking for you. Quietly now. She's sleeping." Eli crept into Clara's room to find her propped against pillows, pale as the sheets, but alive. In a cradle beside the bed lay a tiny bundle. Clara's eyes fluttered open. "Eli?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came. Nothing could have kept me away." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "A son. Clara, we have a son." "Look at him," she urged. Eli turned to the cradle and forgot how to breathe. The baby was perfect. Tiny fists curled against his chest, dark hair like Eli's own. Clara's delicate features in miniature, as if sensing his father's presence. The baby opened his eyes, gray like his mother's. "Can I?" "Of course. He's yours." Eli lifted his son with infinite care, marveling at how light he was, how fragile and strong all at once. The baby made a small sound of contentment and settled against his father's chest. "What shall we call him?" Clara asked, watching them with tired eyes full of love. Eli thought of all they'd overcome, all the storms weathered. "Daniel," he said finally. "It means God is my judge. Let others judge as they will. God knows our hearts." "Daniel Garrett," Clara murmured. "It's perfect." Eli stayed for a week, helping care for both Clara and the baby. Clara's recovery was slow. The birth had been hard, and she'd lost more blood than the doctor liked. But gradually, color returned to her cheeks and strength to her limbs. The other boarders were charmed by the baby. And Mrs. Hartley proved a font of maternal wisdom. Still, Eli could see the longing in Clara's eyes whenever she looked out the window. "Soon," he promised. "As soon as you're strong enough." "I know. It's just, I want to go home. Eli, I want to raise our son on the ranch, in the house where he was conceived. I want to wake up beside you every morning and go to sleep in your arms every night. You will. I swear it." But when he returned to Cedar Ridge, he found the situation worse than when he'd left. The story had spread. He'd been seen in Las Cruces, at a boarding house where a certain pregnant widow had been staying. The gossips had a field day with it. Worse, Harold Whitmore had been busy in Eli's absence. There were legal challenges to his water rights, questions about his land boundaries, harassment at every turn. It was clear they meant to drive him out one way or another. Eli fought back with paperwork and determination. But he was only one man. The final straw came in early April, when he woke to find half his cattle dead, poisoned at the waterhole. The sheriff, in Whitmore's pocket, declared it an unfortunate accident, possibly bad water from the spring melt. That night, Eli sat at his kitchen table and faced the truth. He couldn't bring Clara and Daniel back to this, not with the town set against them, not with threats escalating to destruction of property and livelihood. He penned a difficult letter. "My dearest Clara, circumstances here have worsened. I think it best if you remain in Las Cruces for now. I'm looking into selling the ranch and relocating. Perhaps California or Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh, where Daniel can grow up without the shadow of gossip." Her response came by return mail. "No, absolutely not. That ranch is your heart, Eli Garrett, and I won't let you sell it because of narrow-minded fools. I'm coming home. Daniel is strong enough to travel now, and so am I. If you won't come for us, I'll find my own way. We face this together. Remember?" Eli smiled despite everything. His stubborn, brave wife. He should have known better than to try to protect her by keeping her away. 2 weeks later, he stood at the stage depot once again, But this time he was waiting for arrivals. When the stage rolled in and Clara appeared in the door, Daniel in her arms, Eli felt complete for the first time in months. He helped her down, drinking in the sight of them. Clara was still pale, thinner than before the pregnancy, but her eyes blazed with determination. Daniel had grown, his features more defined, unmistakably a Garrett. "Welcome home," Eli said simply. "It's good to be home," Clara replied, her chin high despite the stares and whispers from the depot crowd. They drove through town like royalty, Clara holding Daniel proudly, meeting every shocked gaze with steady defiance. By the time they reached the ranch, Eli was grinning. "Did you see Mrs. Whitmore's face?" he asked. "I thought her eyes might pop clean out of her head." "Good," Clara said with satisfaction. "Let them all see. I'm Mrs. Eli Garrett. This is our son, and we're not going anywhere." That night, as they lay in their own bed with Daniel sleeping peacefully in the cradle Martha had never gotten to use, Clara said, "Tell me everything, every threat, every challenge. We'll face it all." So Eli told her about the poisoned cattle, the legal harassment, the escalating campaign to drive them out. Clara listened, her expression growing more militant with each revelation. "First thing tomorrow, we go see Judge McKay in the county seat," she said. "He's not in Whitmore's pocket, and he knows the law. We'll file complaints about the harassment, the poisoning, all of it. Then we'll see Banker Whitmore about a loan to replace the cattle, and if he refuses, we'll make sure everyone knows he's denying legitimate business out of personal spite." "Clara, I'm not finished. We'll also pay a visit to the newspaper in the next town. Tell our side of the story. A war widow trying to make an honest living, falling in love with her employer, marrying properly before God. Let's see how that plays against their ugly gossip." Eli pulled her closer, amazed anew at her strength. "You've been thinking about this. I've had months to think. They want to fight? They'll get one. But on our terms, using law and truth as our weapons." Daniel stirred in his sleep, making small baby sounds. Both parents held their breath until he settled again. "He's worth fighting for," Clara whispered. "This life we've built is worth fighting for." "Yes," Eli agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It is." As if in agreement, a coyote called in the distance, but tonight it sounded less like loneliness and more like a battle cry. The Garretts were home, all three of them, and they wouldn't be moved. The town of Cedar Ridge had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn that sometimes love wasn't gentle. Sometimes it was fierce and protective and strong enough to face down any storm. Clara fell asleep with a small smile on her lips, already planning tomorrow's campaign. Eli lay awake longer, holding his family close, grateful beyond words to have them home. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and somehow, he thought they just might win. The summer of 1888 arrived with unusual violence, not just the weather, though the thunderstorms that year were fierce, but human violence as well. The Garrett Ranch became a fortress under siege. It started small, cut fence wires that let cattle stray, dead chickens left on their porch like warnings. Then came the night riders, hooded men who galloped past the house, firing shots into the air, trying to terrorize them into leaving. Clara refused to be cowed. She kept Eli's rifle by the door and the shotgun in the kitchen. Daniel's cradle moved to the center of the house, away from windows. When the riders came, she met them with return fire, her aim true enough to send them scattering. "Taught by the best," she told Eli grimly, reloading. The legal battles Clara had initiated were slowly bearing fruit. Judge McKay, an honest man who'd served with distinction in the territorial courts, was not pleased to hear about the campaign against the Garretts. He issued injunctions against further harassment and ordered an investigation into the poisoned cattle. But one night in August, everything changed. Eli woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, disoriented, he thought Clara was burning breakfast. Then reality crashed in. That wasn't cook smoke. Fire! He shook Clara awake, already moving. "The barn! They could see the orange glow through the window. Clara grabbed Daniel while Eli pulled on his boots and grabbed his gun. Together they raced outside to find the barn fully engulfed, flames leaping toward the star-filled sky. The horses were screaming. Without thought, Eli plunged into the inferno. The heat was overwhelming, smoke blinding, but he found the stalls by memory. Throwing them open, the terrified animals bolted for safety. He emerged coughing, singed, to find Clara fighting the fire with buckets of water from the pump. It was hopeless. The barn was gone, but they might save the other buildings if they could keep it from spreading. They fought side by side through the night, Daniel wailing from his basket on the porch. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin, but the house and other structures stood intact. It was Clara who found the message, nailed to the gate pot. Next time it's the house. Something in Eli snapped. He'd endured threats, property damage, attacks on his livelihood, but threatening his family's home, where his infant son slept, that was too far. "Stay here," he told Clara, his voice deadly calm. "Where are you going?" "To end this." He rode straight to Harold Whitmore's grand house on the best street in Cedar Ridge. The banker was at breakfast, surrounded by crystal and imported china. Eli kicked in the door, sending the maid shrieking. "Garrett!" Whitmore sputtered, egg on his chin. "How dare you!" Eli grabbed him by his silk vest, hauling him up. "Listen close. Whitmore, you've had your fun, tried to run us off, but last night you threatened my wife and child, and that changes things. I don't know what you're talking about." "Shut up." Eli's grip tightened. "I've got a signed statement from Jake Morrison, the Reverend's nephew, saying you paid him and others to harass us. Judge McKay has it now. That's conspiracy, destruction of property, attempted murder if we'd been in that barn." Whitmore's face went pale. "You can't prove. I don't have to. See, during the war, I was a sharpshooter, very good at my job. Man threatens my family." "Well," Eli smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Accidents happen on these frontier roads. Snakes, bandits. Sometimes a man just disappears. You're threatening me. I'm explaining consequences. Leave my family alone, or find out just how good a shot I still am. Your choice." He released Whitmore, who stumbled backward. At the door, Eli turned. "Oh, and that loan Clara applied for? To replace our poisoned cattle? I expect approval by week's end. Market rates, fair terms, or that statement goes to the territorial prosecutor." He walked out, leaving Whitmore shaking behind his fine breakfast table. The harassment stopped overnight. The loan came through. Slowly, the ranch began to recover. But Eli knew they'd made an enemy for life, and Whitmore had a long memory. The answer came from an unexpected source. In September, a stranger arrived. Well-dressed, Eastern accent, asking for Eli by name, wary. Eli met him on the porch, rifle close at hand. "Mr. Garrett, my name is James Thornton. I represent a consortium of investors interested in territorial development. We're particularly interested in water rights and grazing land. Not interested in selling. I'm not here to buy." Thornton smiled. "I'm here to invest. You see, we've heard about your difficulties with certain local interests. We believe men like Whitmore represent the past. Corruption, small-minded control. We prefer to work with men of integrity." "What are you proposing?" "Partnership. We provide capital for improvements. Better wells, more cattle, modern equipment. You provide the land and expertise. Profits split fairly and—" Thornton's smile sharpened. "Our lawyers are very good at dealing with local interference." Eli studied him. "Why us?" "Because you fought back. Because your wife had the courage to use the law instead of violence. Because you're the future of this territory. Mr. Garrett, while the Whitmores are the past." Clara emerged, Daniel on her hip. She'd been listening. "What guarantee do we have that you won't try to take our land?" Thornton handed over a thick document. "Ironclad contract. You maintain ownership and control. We're silent partners. Nothing more. Take it to any lawyer you trust." They did, and found it fair. More than fair. Generous. With the partnership signed, everything changed. New wells were dug, doubling their water capacity. A new barn rose from the ashes, bigger and better. Their cattle herd grew to 3 times its former size. More importantly, Whitmore and his cronies found themselves facing lawyers who ate small-town bullies for breakfast. The harassment suits Clara had filed suddenly had serious legal weight behind them. One by one, the conspirators paid settlements or fled town. By Christmas, the Garretts were not just surviving but thriving. The ranch sprawled larger than ever, and they'd hired 2 hands to help with the work. Clara had the house she'd always dreamed of, with real glass windows and a modern stove. On Daniel's first birthday, they held a party. Not everyone in Cedar Ridge came. Old prejudices died hard. But enough did. The minister and his wife, of course. Samuel and his family. Several ranching families who'd quietly supported them. Even some townspeople who'd decided the Garretts were here to stay and might as well be neighborly. Clara stood on the porch, watching their guests mingle in the yard, Daniel toddling between them on unsteady legs. Eli came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning back against him. "A year ago I was in Las Cruces, wondering if I'd ever see you again. Now look at us. We survived. We did more than survive. We won." Daniel tottered over, arms raised, and Eli scooped him up. Their son babbled happily, pointing at the horses in the corral. "Papa's horses." Eli agreed. "Someday they'll be yours." Clara touched her belly, where their second child grew. This pregnancy was easier. Without the stress and fear of the first, this child would be born into safety and love, with a proper doctor attending. "The midwife says it's a girl this time," she told Eli. His face lit up. "A daughter?" "Rose," Clara said, "for the prairie roses that were blooming when you proposed. Rose Garrett." Eli tested the name, smiling. "Perfect." As the sun set over their land, their empire built from love and stubbornness, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The widow and the widower, both broken by loss, had found in each other not just healing but strength. "I love you," she told Eli, words she'd never tired of saying. "I love you too," he replied, kissing her temple. "My unlikely bride, my salvation." In the distance, coyotes began their evening song, but Clara no longer heard loneliness in their calls. She heard freedom, wildness, survival against all odds. Just like them. Thank you so much for joining me on this Wild West journey of love, loss, and triumph. It's been an honor to share Clara and Eli's story with you. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales that touch the heart. What did you think of Clara's courage? Eli's transformation? Share your thoughts. I read every comment. Until next time, partners.